After the intermission, I'll be joined by Paul Whitehouse as we take a look at some music hall stars who appeared in some very early Ealing films.
Here, have you seen it?
Yeah.
Here, where's me washboard, eh?
And I'll take a look at my favourite wartime Ealing films.
To our beloved Führer. You ready? Go!
This is the White House, formerly known as the Lodge, bought in 1902 by a man called Will Barker, whose dream was to make films. And after buying the adjacent land, that's exactly what he did. In fact, by 1912, this humble little plot on Ealing Green had become the biggest film studio in Britain. Leap forward 20 years, an expansion was underway. Basil Dean, the new studio head at the recently formed Associated Talking Pictures, was a theatre producer, impresario and visionary. He embraced the medium of sound, which at the time was as popular as the horseless carriage. Never catch on. But these buildings you see around me, completed in 1934, included Britain's first ever soundproof studio. So this place was now in a position to compete with America, and that meant Hollywood.
At the beginning of his tenure, Basil Dean was fortunate enough to lay his hands on some of the biggest musical stars at the time and cast them in his films. I'm talking, of course, about Gracie Fields and George Formby.
If there's one thing that I like, it's riding around on the motorbike. I'm a speed king when the ones begin. I once won first prize 2 and 6. I know all the dirt like dirty tricks. I'm a marvel when I'm out to win.
Not only were they big hitters over here, they were huge stars in America, and they made Associated Talking Pictures a lot of money.
Here we are in the old Rail Line pub, stage 6, a stone's throw across the road from Ealing Studios. Yeah. So, you know, all politically correct now. No smoke, no booze.
I know, it's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it is a stone's throw because we've just thrown some stones at Ealing Studios just to test it out, haven't we? No, it's fantastic, isn't it? And especially, you know, with the closure of so many studios and
pubs.
Yeah, and pubs. to think, I mean, I don't know, they might have closed Ealing Studios while we've been talking.
It could be.
But it is so lovely to be in an proper old pub with the panels and thinking that, you know, Peter Sellers might have popped in and probably not bought Herbert Lom pints. Yeah. Very tight, never put his hand in his pocket, Sellers, you know. He would never put his hand in his pocket. I'm making that up. Apparently he might have thrown his cash around, for all I know.
Yeah, you ain't had the argument yet. Here, I'll put some cream on your strawberries if you let me park my ukulele in your picnic hamper. Who do I think I am? Homer Khayyam, king of the kayaks? Oh, you're very young, aren't you? Here, what does that remind you of? Yes, it's a snake. Weightlifting. I'll touch the straws here.
Is Arthur Atkinson from the Fast Show, is that based on Tommy Trinder or George Formby or...
Well, it's
combination.
It's alliterative. Arthur Atkinson, Arthur Askey. Yeah. He's a sort of, he's a kind of, you know, an amalgam, yes, or an accumulation of all those old musical characters that I am, believe it or not, slightly too young to have real knowledge of. It's only the old George Formby songs and, you know, and a bit of, Arthur Askey sort of vaguely, you know, like the bee. Oh, he's a buzzing bee. Do you know that song?
No. Please sing it.
I don't know. He sings about some bees buzzing around.
Oh, what a glorious thing to be, a healthy, grown-up, busy bee, making hay while time is ripe, building up the honeycomb just like tripe.
like quite a few Ealing films, but I do think in the midst of time, all old black and white comedies have got kind of mixed up. And I'm getting old now and slightly confused by life. It's hard enough kicking up. I don't even know who you are.
George Formby and Gracie Fields were pivotal for the survival of Ealing through the Great Depression of the 1930s. The problem was, Basil Dean was less than impressed. These weren't the sort of films he was interested in making.
Dean acquired these two big stars at Ealing who made scads of cash, but Dean didn't get their humour at all. In fact, he wrote memos in the company, to the company talking about the inexplicable appeal of Gracie Fields. And like Gracie Fields was their big banker, their big star.
And he didn't get George Formby either.
He didn't get George Formby. I mean, George Formby was a bit weird, though, wasn't he? What Dean really wanted to do was make these big, elaborate costume dramas starring his wife, Victoria Hopper, who wasn't the greatest actor in the world, and nobody went to see them. And so the Ealing board decided the Dean years must end, and Balkan is brought in to kind of zhuzh up the studio and get it back on a proper footing.
My next guest is one of the legendary figures of British show business. She was born above a fish and chip shop in Rochdale, went on to become the nation's sweetheart on stage, on record, in films and radio. Indeed, Parliament once adjourned because she was about to broadcast. She was once described as the greatest entertainer this country's ever produced, and if that assessment causes a few raised